Simon, what do you think? I mean, Nuno, he seems popular as far as I see it in many quarters.
I was going to ask, is it another one of those inspired decisions from Sullivan that doesn't read the room because of the fans, because they dislike most of the things he does? And I wasn't sure. First of all, his form as West Ham manager was not top 10 at all. His form was actually quite poor up until the last 15 games where he pulled it together.
Yeah.
But I think he got something like 36 points out of the games that he was involved in, which was 33, because I was under the impression he came in much later. He didn't. He came in with 33 games to go.
Yeah, he had a really bad start.
Now, as far as he's concerned, contractually he'd been obligated. The fact he rocked around to that gin palace that passes as David Sullivan's house in Thyden Boyce would have suggested to me that he wasn't going to be leaving, because if you're going to get rid of a manager, you don't write around to your house to tell him. You deal with him on the training grounds. So I would suspect that for whatever reason, they've aligned themselves with the reality that he's a capable manager, that the end result, the end situation, and ignored the beginning, that it took him a long time to get started. And that was probably the real problem, that the tail was too long at the beginning. And of course, the fact that he'd done better at the end and finished the season with a marginal strength in terms of they won the last game of the season 3-0. They were dreadful against Newcastle. I think they threw it away against Palace in the game that they drew 0-0 and settled for that 0-0 draw when they were in decent form. But all of that probably lends yourself to who is best equipped? Who do we know? How has he worked with us at the back end of the season? And what is his performances like in the Championship with Wolves 7, 8, 9 years ago? All of those probably make common sense to say, if the fans aren't particularly offside about it, why would you change it? The manager must have accepted the premise of being involved in a relegation battle. That's why he was brought in.
True. Why would you change it, Danny? He was brought in to avoid relegation. They're relegated, and he stays on. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, I think there is some common sense around it. I think you can look at it both ways. Unfortunately, you're always going to have a certain section of the fan base that isn't on board with it because of the style of football has been talked about. I was listening to a phone-in yesterday where a lot of West Ham fans didn't want him to stay. So there'll be a mixed bag. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I think probably with his experience in the Championship, he already knows the group. I can see the sense behind it, yeah.
Style of football is not going to be the question about West Ham in the Championship. Getting out of the bleeding division is. And if we're going to make the argument...
No, West Ham fans have always...
I know they are, but they're big enough and ugly enough to realise that getting out of the Championship is bigger than what they have to play like once upon a time when they all won the World Cup for us. But the fact is that if you talk about Scott Parker, then Scott Parker gets people relegated. So if you're going to bring Scott Parker in to manage your side, then you make the argument, what are you keeping Nuno Espirito Santo for? He got you relegated. Well, Scott Parker got Burnley relegated. So you can't have it both ways in the same argument.